Timing has started, so I think we can get going. So it's great to be here in Amsterdam, and great to have this distinguished panelist with me. So without further ado, let's start with introduction. So my name is Hervé Larren. I'm strategic advisor with DigitalX. We're the largest Bitcoin treasury company in Australia. And also, we're the #1 ETF on the Australian market. So please, start.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Kingsley Advani. I'm an investor and founder of Allocations. We have invested over $45 million into DATs, and I've personally made over 200 investments, and very excited to be here.
Thank you for having me, Sebastien Hess. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of Future, the first Swiss Bitcoin treasury company, co-founded together with Adam Back and Richard Byworth.
Perfect, great. So the name of the panel is Blood in the Streets. Is there actually blood in the streets at the moment?
Yes, but it's not just DATs. So there has been a market pullback. The S&P is down, Bitcoin is down, I think it's about 96K right now, and DATs are down. There's a few reasons for this. I would say generally the market, we have interest rate cuts that are less certain than they were before. I think there was about a 90% chance there would be a December rate cut. Now the market, I think, is divided. I think it's about 50% odds. So interest rates are very important for risk assets like DATs. And so I do think Q1, Q2 next year will be very good for interest rate cuts, but the market has had a bit of sell-off because of that. Also, you've had the government shutdown, the longest US government shutdown on record. It's just ended now. And we have had a short-term burst of the DAT bubble. We've had, MNAV premiums as high as 23x for some companies. And so the DAT market has been correcting slightly. But I think this is just a short-term market shock. I think in the medium to long run, DATs are still very early, and we have a long way to go.
Okay. Maybe to add, I think absolutely, volatility is a feature, not a bug of this industry. The importance for Bitcoin treasury companies overall is to be able to use those different sentiments and the right instruments during those sentiments to still continuously accrete Bitcoin. And we're seeing this with the different companies traded on stock exchanges globally, that they are still finding ways, credit, convertibles, different instruments to continuously accrete Bitcoin and increase the Bitcoin per share metric. But the compression of MNAV, knowing that we had been in a very bullish environment, was something that was set to happen. So fully with you.
So how would you say, when there's blood in the street, how much is it dependent on the price of Bitcoin versus the overall macro environment? Because right now it seems that we're talking a lot about interest rates and other, I would say, Fed policy elements or government shutdown that affects everybody, including tech stocks and other. Or do you feel that it's completely related to the price of Bitcoin? And even with everything that is happening on a global perspective, if the price of Bitcoin was an all-time high, we wouldn't have blood in the streets for digital asset companies. How do you establish, or would you say it's 50-50 between macro and price of Bitcoin?
I'd say it's a bit of both. With DATs, you're investing in a levered play on the underlying token. So if Bitcoin hits all-time highs, the DAT will also do well, right? It's a levered acceleration upwards. But when the market goes down, then it's a levered acceleration downwards. So for DAT investors, it can be quite volatile. So there is some macro effects, but also, Bitcoin as well.
I would say yes. In terms of the beta that you get as an investor into DATs or Bitcoin treasury companies, you get the beta from Bitcoin, but you also get the beta from the treasury stock itself, right? So what we're seeing today is we see many of the Bitcoin treasury companies trading below NAV. So with a MNAV premium below 1, that reflects that it's not just about Bitcoin price. There's also an element of correction around the model, around some of the kind of, I would say, bullishness that pushed those companies to be able to raise a lot of capital. definitely people took profit. I mean, when we saw companies trade at like above 5x NAV, you're going to have hedge funds coming, shorting the stock, bringing gravity back to the system. And I think we have a bit of fatigue with that model that is showing off on the short term. Typically, a Bitcoin treasury company should be able to accumulate Bitcoin, whether Bitcoin is at all-time high or at very low levels. It's just the actual intrinsic value of the company that is impacted by Bitcoin price. So I think, as you said, it's a bit of both. There's still an element of sentiment that the model has reached some element of fatigue, especially the pure plays. And we see now different avenues, credits. Sailor has launched now a product here in Europe to also tap that market, that are becoming also non-dilutive avenues to accrete Bitcoin for Bitcoin treasury companies.
So let me ask you first, how is it possible to trade at under 1 MNAV? Because I think for a lot of investors, or when we look at businesses itself, at Bitcoin treasury company businesses, I think the absolutely bottom is that, well, we're going to value the company to the Bitcoin that they have in the balance sheet. And that's kind of was the floor. And in fact, we could argue that the floor might be the MNAV of strategy. And it says, well, if they're at 1.5, we're a smaller, for newly launched Bitcoin treasury companies, well, we're a smaller entity. Let's consider a startup. Therefore, it should have a much higher MNAV. And at maturity phase, will we be at the strategy level? Right now, we're in a situations where, regardless of the life cycle of the treasury company, and regardless of their size, everybody trades under 1 MNAV. So how does that make any sense, especially for new investors coming in, where they have different product between holding, spot Bitcoin, between holding an ETF, and all of a sudden you have this discount that is happening, which is almost, is there something wrong with the business model? Like, how would you guys explain that?
I would say that investors can be quite irrational. So if you have, some DATs in your portfolio and they start crashing, if you're irrational, you may just, market sell them if you want to cut your losses. So theoretically, it should maintain a 1x MNAV, but the market is irrational. So you will have MNAV premiums and MNAV discounts. But I also think this is for DATs trading at a discount MNAV. It's a great opportunity for M&A and stock buybacks. So we recently saw Strive acquire Semler Scientific for, I think it was about a 0.8x or 0.9x MNAV. And I think they paid about 3x the stock price. So when DATs are trading a discount to MNAV, I think we'll see more M&A and also stock buybacks. I think we saw Orange BTC recently do a stock buyback, and also Metaplanet. So I think discount to MNAV is an opportunity as well.
So the investor are irrational, but the market is always right. So does the market have it right at the moment?
There's a few elements, right, to unpack in this. I think there's not every treasury company, Bitcoin treasury company, is the same, right? And some companies have operating models that are attached to it. Some companies with completely different businesses that are coming attached to the treasury piece. So there's definitely an element of valuation. We talked about Semler. There's also Sequence in France that has a completely different business in the microchip business. They launched a DAT as well, but they were never really able to trade above NAV or at a premium above NAV, because there's just a business attached to the treasury play that is very difficult to price in. And how do you actually price in that business attached to the pure Bitcoin holdings? That's one element. I'd say, that's why you should have different levels of premiums. It's nothing new with treasury companies that you have companies trading at a premium and others trading at a discount, right? A well-operated business in different industries, from like banking that are able to issue shares above book, to also large asset companies in the real estate space with operating business trading at premiums above their NAV, are able to leverage this to create more value, because there is really cash flows, operating value in what they're doing. Companies that are not trading or cannot offer this spectrum typically trade at the book value or below book value. So it's nothing new with the Bitcoin treasury companies. What we see today is that we've gone to a level of frothiness and kind of bullishness that was very, very high, 30, 50 times. And then by, just natural effect of gravity of the market, you have a correction. And that correction now is pushing in territories which are a bit irrational because some companies are very well operated, but it seems like the differentiation from the market standpoint is not clear enough between what is a good Bitcoin Treasury company, what it requires, and what is a not so good or not so well performing Bitcoin Treasury company today. Hence, they're all trading at pretty low premiums or below 1 of premium.
So a number of months ago, any companies that was buying Bitcoin was automatically a good Bitcoin Treasury company. It seems that now it's splitting between the really good, the not so good, and in between. You mentioned that you were launching the first Bitcoin Treasury company in Switzerland. How do you, I imagine you have discussion with investors. How do they, what is their sentiment about newly launched vehicles versus being able to buy liquid stock of already established Bitcoin Treasury company trading under 1M NAV? As a new vehicle, how do you manage these two equations?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first main question that comes in discussions with market participants is absolutely like today you can buy a company below 1. Why a company should list above 1? And what is really defining that element for us when we're listing the company? I think the first thing is there's still an element of the market where you're launching your Bitcoin Treasury or your Treasury play. Switzerland is quite differentiated in many elements. So we're the first ones. We're doing it through a listing, a direct listing, not a RTO. So we're really going through the process of what any other company that needs to do an IPO on the Swiss exchange has to do. So regulatory and compliance-wise, it's quite differentiated. And then in the Swiss market, you have elements, especially around the yields with negative yields or close to zero yields, that enables very well a Bitcoin Treasury play because you can use the KGAR of Bitcoin, have a cost of capital that is extremely low to also start using credit or prefs, which is something that Saylor has done and other US Treasury companies are doing today. In a way that is quite competitive. So the premium needs to come from the ability of the team to execute on those different instruments. Credit, cost of capital, structure is one of them, but also all the rest that comes with it, right? So if you have a cash flow positive business, you can allocate some of that to Bitcoin. That's a better Bitcoin Treasury company than one that is just solely using share and capital raises. If you look from an investor standpoint that is looking for value, right? So it's typically around that, but it is a difficult situation right now to express that because of just the different levels of premium in the market.
So can you walk us through, you mentioned going through an IPO versus a reverse takeover, an RTO. The reason why most of the businesses go through an RTO is that they need to have, they're basically buying into a listing. There's an operating business most of the time that is completely irrelevant to the Bitcoin industry. When you go through an IPO process, is there a core business? Is the core business generating yield for Bitcoin, or is there a core business that need to be developed? How does the IPO process works for the listing when the core of the strategy is to make a Bitcoin Treasury company?
And that's exactly it. So you go to your regulator, to the exchange, and you really explain the strategy is not to buy an existing business that has nothing to do with your approach to get to listing, which is, I would think, a smart but also sometimes dangerous ways to go about listing a treasury company, because then you have that legacy business. What do you do with it? Whereas what we did is really to explain the play. We explained that we're going to be raising a lot of capital, buying Bitcoin, offering Bitcoin-related services from the start, and not have any legacy business attached to it, which, at least for the Swiss market, has been something very important to kind of differentiate ourselves.
And why hasn't there been, as of now, a Swiss treasury company, because that path forward, I think any Bitcoin treasury company in the world would like to have the opportunity to do straight an IPO, but that was never possible. I mean, the core business of Metaplanet was a hotel business that they kind of pivoted. But in your case, why hasn't there been so many treasury companies launched on that market?
Switzerland is a bit more conservative, as people know. They value security. They value also looking at what is happening outside of Switzerland to kind of really understand if it's something that can fit. So there's a bit more gatekeeping. So it took time. It's taking time, but there will be more Swiss treasury companies coming up, I'm sure. Once there's one, then the success is shown. Sailor has also talked a lot about Swiss franc and the yields in Switzerland, right? So I think there will be more things coming to Switzerland in the next years.
Kingsley, from your standpoint, you interact with a lot of investors. If an investor today comes and see you and says, "Hey, I have $1 million to put in Bitcoin," how would you allocate it between just buying Bitcoin in a cold wallet, buying the ETF, and then potentially buying treasury companies? And which treasury company would you actually buy? Or would you do some in between and saying, well, actually, let's play the preferred game and go after, the stretch vehicle of MicroStrategy when everything, while, focusing on, yield that we can manage? How do you advise investors who wants to enter now the market?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start for me personally. I'm about, in my Bitcoin portfolio, probably about 90% Bitcoin, 10% DATs. So it depends on your risk profile. DATs, again, they're a levered play on the underlying token. So when the market is, in an upwards trend, the DAT will perform pretty well. But on a downward trend like we recently had, it will perform quite badly. So it depends on your risk appetite. You could be 80% Bitcoin, 20% DATs. It could be 80% DATs, 20% Bitcoin. So it depends on your investment profile. We have had a lot of investors on our platform invest with Bitcoin into these deals. So they may already have Bitcoin. They think DATs are a great opportunity. So they may put some of their Bitcoin into some of these DAT companies. So yeah, it depends on your risk appetite. As I mentioned, DATs are levered plays on Bitcoin on the upside and the downside.
So you mentioned, now would be the time to increase the position on DATs if it's trading at 1.5. So is the actual the arbitrage right now selling Bitcoin and buying DAT stocks?
You want to buy low and sell high. So if the market is down and trading at discounts, it can be a good buy signal. But I can't say, is this the bottom or do we have more to go? It's difficult to tell. And there are a lot of macro factors like interest rates, Fed shutdowns, tariffs. So the market is very volatile right now. So I can't say, are we at the absolute bottom? But typically, if there has been a large sell-off, it can be a good buy opportunity. And I have actually added to some of my DAT positions just this morning.
One of the, if you had, now that you're launching your own DAT, you had a chance to look at the market itself, who inspired you as far as that? If you take, the benchmark and you say, okay, if I could invest outside of your own or outside of DigitalX, which DATs actually you would say it's a great value in the market at the moment? Would you do a mix between the preferred of strategy? Would you say, oh, Metaplanet with their size is the play? or you would say, you know what, none of them, the next one being launched is going to be, start with a fresh slate. How would you play actually, or who inspired you as far as that to build what you're actually building at the moment?
Yeah, I think what is very interesting today with this ecosystem growing, you have different products for different risk metrics, risk appetite, right? So, of course, strategy and Michael Saylor have been the ones really creating this space, and I think what they're currently doing in the credit space is extremely interesting. They got their first credit rating, which, of course, is a first step for this industry, but they're also now able to show that their stock and in the end Bitcoin can be used as a collateral, right, in credit market used by banks. So they're building that completely new economy for Bitcoin, and I think what they're doing is very impressive. Obviously, something that we want to look at very closely for Switzerland. As I mentioned, we have low interest rates. There's a fairly large bond market, listed bond market. So something that we look very closely from our standpoint. Metaplanet has done a lot of things very well as well, right? They use that kind of liquid or synthetic ATM program to kind of tap the market when they're trading at a premium, to be really able to be aggressive on the share issuance, despite not really having an ATM as a tool in Japan. That has worked very well, raising 1.5 billion. We've seen companies using Bitcoin-denominated converts to create torque and tap into the Bitcoin investor space to generate Bitcoin yield. There's been a few companies in Europe like Capital B doing that and doing very well. So we looked at all those companies, tried to really understand what works, what doesn't work, what is applicable to our market. But then it's really important to understand what level of risk, what product and instrument you want to use as an investor. And then you will find a company that has the right approach to that.
So well, it seems that, I mean, the strategy model is all about preferred, is all about tapping into the bond market. The benefit of going public is to have that ATM and being able to start the flywheel. If that is not available, is there a point to go public? Shouldn't it be, vehicles that just create yield, that gives an investor yield, that investors can see, okay, how much is Strive doing, how much is Stretch, and how much are other Bitcoin bonds types of offering? Isn't that the future of the Bitcoin accessible to investor, because that's where strategy and Metaplanet soon would be doing? Or do you think there's still value to go public for a treasury company?
I think at some point most companies will be Bitcoin treasury companies. They will start allocate from their cash flow into Bitcoin. So there will be pure plays, companies that offer this exposure and that kind of structured finance exposure, like Thaler and Strategy and other companies, like what we're doing at Future as well, which are, I would say, maybe more institutional products as well to get the exposure with different instruments. But down the line, as you said, you'll have private companies, non-listed companies also buying into Bitcoin, also using Bitcoin and leveraging Bitcoin from the balance sheet standpoint. But the industry of what we call DATs is more for the listed part, right? It's really to offer this exposure, that structured exposure to the underlying assets. And the listing here is a key element of the strategy for sure, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kingsley, from your standpoint, when you look at the world, and I think you mentioned you invested in 10 Bitcoin treasury companies. Are there markets that you're more bullish than others? Let's say everybody trades under 1 MNAV. Do you look at some potential benefits from certain markets, saying, well, Metaplanet is also a tax play when investing in this, or you prefer the US ones giving the political environment, or you're saying, hey, we're bullish in Europe because the interest rates are low. If you have to rank the level of appeal for an investors that has the choice between many products, and if they want to focus strictly on Bitcoin treasury companies, which one would you say in terms of geographical opportunity you would see the best one, and also which ones do you feel are better run than others?
Yeah, I think that's globally distributed now. So you can pick any type of product and any type of market. So and this is only accelerating. So you can have the spot markets, you can have yield type products where you can, get a 10% annual coupon. And we've looked at DATs everywhere. So not just US, South America, even UAE recently. There's a African Bitcoin Corporation coming soon. There's, Europe. You have Australia as well. I think DigitalX. So there's many different DAT markets, and I think it's a great selection for investors to, pick a few that resonate with them. And I think this is only accelerating. I think there'll be DATs in every continent. And as you said before, I think every company will be able to be a Bitcoin treasury company eventually.
Sebastian, last word for you. Swiss versus the entire world of DATs. Where do you feel, besides being more conservative, where do you feel it stands when you look at the world and the offering that there currently is?
I mean, Switzerland was always a safe haven country, a place of financial innovation and banking. So I think that's very much what we're trying to replicate, but with a Bitcoin core from the start.
Perfect, amazing. Well, that's the end of our panel. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you.